Good morning. Today we finished the chapter of Matthew 24. So we look at verses 29 through 51, and we're still in Remember Holy Week. We've had Palm Sunday, and we've had Jesus run-ins with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and now he's giving his disciples and those with his disciples some final words of advice, some final instructions. And in chapter 24, he deals a lot with the end of the age, the second coming of Jesus. And so we talked some about yesterday, and then today starts immediately after the suffering. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give light, the stars will fall from the heavens, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. And I mean, again, it's sounding more chaos, that way. And then verse 30 says, then the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes will, so it's, the Son of Man will appear in heaven. And he goes on and he talks about, learning the lesson from the fig tree, but, some will be taken and some will be left. And if there's parables that Jesus talks about here that we're familiar with. But what's most important to know about this is that Jesus will return. He will appear. That's what verse 30, the sign of the Son, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. So, Jesus is going to be there. And he's going to be there for all to see, and I've shared before and again that, it's not going to be a secret. Everybody's going to know it. And he said, they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And I think about, to see Jesus in his glory. You think about, a little while ago we talked about the Transfiguration. And this Sunday is the second Sunday, the 12th, is another lesson from the Sermon on the Mount. But the 19th, that Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday. We'll have that text from Matthew 17 that, with Jesus and those three disciples on the mountain, and Jesus changed, and that's the last Sunday before we begin Lent. And, so that everybody will see Jesus in all of his glory, just as, Peter, James, and John did up on that mountain. He will come in his glory, and everybody will see, all will know that he's coming. And, in verse 34, he says, I tell you this, that this generation will not pass away until all of these things have happened. And this is one of the reasons that, Peter, James, and John, and the other early disciples watched and expected so much that Jesus was going to return, just within a few years. And in Paul's writings, he says that, for those of you that are just, lazing around doing nothing, anticipating the Lord's return, no, he says, get busy and work. And Jesus tells us that in what he talks about at the end of this chapter. He asks in verse 45, who is the faithful and wise slave, the one that the master has put in charge of his household? This person is the one that continues to do his job, not knowing when the master will return, but doing his job. And so this is a message for you and for me, that as Christians, we are to live our lives as Christians. We are to be, loving God, loving neighbor. We are to be the best that we can be, anticipating Jesus' return, not like the unfaithful slave or the wicked slave that Jesus talks about next. Where the wicked one says, "Oh, my master isn't coming back. And it's who knows when he's coming? So I can do whatever I want. I can mistreat people. And Jesus says, that's not the kind of person you want to be. And he says, the master will come on a day that slave doesn't expect, and he will cut him in pieces, put him with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So those who are living lives reflecting God's love, those who are being faithful in their Christian life and being faithful to God, will receive the good reward, heaven. And those that aren't, those that are just, not paying attention to Jesus, not saying, I got plenty of time, or, again, here's that picture of the separation between heaven and hell. And for those people that say there is no such thing, I tell them, look at this. I mean, Jesus talks about it. Jesus says that, not everybody is going to be lifted up into heaven, and it's, it isn't in here, right, this place, but, talks about, one being taken and one left. And it isn't that Jesus is sneaking in, that just some are taken and that somebody turns around and, oh, what happened here? No, everybody's going to know that Jesus has returned. And I kind of skipped over a few verses in here, starting at verse 37, when Jesus says, of that day and of that hour, no one knows. When the Son of Man returns, nobody knows. Not the angels, not Jesus, only God knows that plan. And he likens it to Moses and Noah, no Moses, I'm sorry, Noah and building the ark, and how all of the rest of the people were belittling Noah. And what are you building an ark out here in the middle of the desert? I mean, you're miles from any water. I mean, how are you ever going to, this is just a fool's errand, and it's, Jesus says they went on living and dancing and dining and marrying and carrying on and just going on as if they had no cares of the world. And even though, Noah had warned them, and Noah's building this ark, and they just, all of a sudden, the rains start coming. And if you remember reading the story of Noah's ark, and if you don't, go back and read it again, but God closed the door. Noah didn't pull the door up. So when these others come running and say, open the door and let us in, God had closed the door on the ark. And Noah had nothing to do with it, and he couldn't open it up. But Jesus is saying that, these other people were just going on as if they had all the time in the world to do whatever. But all of a sudden, the judgment came. And, and the judgment in Noah's day was, the waters came. And when the second coming of Jesus comes, it's going to be Jesus coming. And it's going to happen, boom, like in the twinkling of an eye and a snap of a finger. It isn't going to be something that we're going to have a warning that, I commented not so long ago that, we're not going to hear that Jesus is in New York, and then he's in Chicago, and then he's in Minneapolis, so we got time to get ready. No, I mean, Jesus says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, everyone will know. And he says, keep awake, therefore. Verse 42, keep awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, he says, if the owner had known when the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and, protected his house. But, it's just, I mean, we don't ever know when some of these unexpected things are going to happen. That's why they're unexpected. It's called unexpected, because it happens suddenly. But so we are to be prepared, we are to be ready and to be watching and to be waiting, and I shouldn't say watching and waiting. It isn't that. It's to be living our lives in the best way that Jesus would have us live our lives. It's just, and being a good person, and just being a good person isn't all, because there are atheists who are good people. There are people that say there is no God, that can be good people. But to live our lives in faith, knowing that God created, that God sent Jesus, that Jesus died for you and for me, and that Jesus will come again. And so to have our hearts and our minds prepared, and to have, that right relationship with God that only comes through Jesus Christ, and that comes through asking for forgiveness, for, saying to God, I messed up, I'm sorry, help me to do better. We can promise, I'll never do that again. Well, that's a pretty tough promise to keep, because most of the time, we mess up again. We can say, oh, I'm never going to sin again. Yeah, you know how well that works, right? Yeah. But anyway, it's to be ready, to be watching, to be faithful. That's the big thing, to be faithful. To, as this last paragraph talks about already, and I already mentioned it, the faithful servant, the faithful, Jesus says slave, but the faithful believer. To be the faithful believer, living as God would have us live. Sounds simple. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is. But it's always worth it to live the life that God would have us live.